right now. And so this will be recorded and you will have access to it, I believe, within a week of Engage OK's closing. So good morning and welcome to Assessing and Addressing Unfinished Student Learning. I am Christine Kerner. I'm the Executive Director of STEM Education in the Office of Curriculum Instruction at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. I was the former Director of Secondary Mathematics as well, and I'm just very excited to be co-presenting with Dawn Irons today. So Dawn, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope the cloudy skies are offering you a nice reprieve from the scorching temperatures we've had of late. As Christine said, my name is Dawn Irons. I am the Executive Director of Champions of Excellence and Networked Improvement Communities here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. This is nearing my 4th year here at the agency, and it's wonderful to be able to visit with all of you today for what we hope is an exciting and fruitful session here at Engage OK.
Absolutely. And just in the spirit of transparency, we wanted to let you know that there is a member of the media attending this session today. And so we also are excited to have all of these wonderful teachers with us too. And it's nice to see familiar faces and to see some new ones. So thank you again for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping items. You will see a few different icons on our slides. And so in a few minutes, when we start our first activity, you will receive a link to an interactive Google Doc. That interactive Google Doc will only be used when you see that little light bulb document next to the slide. Then we also have breakout room opportunities today. And so we will automatically send you into smaller groups where you will be able to discuss and interact with others. And so you'll see that that's about to happen when you see that little breakout room icon. And finally, we have a lot of interactivity in our Zoom chat box. And so at the bottom of your screen, you should see a series of tools and buttons such as mute, stop video, things like that. If you click on the More button, you should see an option for chat, and that will pull up our actual chat. It looks like quite a few of you are finding it already to say good morning and good morning back. And those icons will direct you to where you're going to type into the chat box to share your responses. So we're trying to keep it interactive today. We know that virtual is not as much fun as in person, but we'll still hope to hear a lot from you and share a lot of information and resources today with each other. We also have a series of session norms, and so just overall, please do not be afraid to communicate, share your ideas, ask questions, get a little bit uncomfortable in the discussion space, and really just be a part of today's presentation because really this information is not generated without you all. And so please continue to share and offer your communication and offer your ideas. And so we have a few goals for today's session. Really, this is about addressing and assessing unfinished learning. We know that the pandemic has brought on a series of changes for our students and our teachers in the way that we had to deliver instruction and in the way that students received instruction. And even if we were completely normal throughout the entire year, we always have students that have this unfinished learning or have these struggles and strengths as well as they enter a new year. And so we're going to be working to develop an understanding of where your own grade level content fits within a pre-K-12 learning progression. We're going to learn about diagnosing gaps and strengths in students' understandings and learning based on the analysis of their work. And then we're going to identify some high leverage instructional strategies and practices to really take action in addressing any unfinished learning and really support students taking learning leaps from wherever they start, helping propel them into their future learning and understanding. And so before we jump in to unfinished learning and different strategies and strengths. Some of you have started to do this in the chat, but we are going to have the opportunity now for you all to take a moment to introduce yourself, put your name, your current role, the district that you teach in, and just for something fun, the last concert that you went to. Now that we're able to go outside and explore again, what is the last concert you went to, or what is a concert you would like to go to? Just give you a moment to enter in. Ooh, we got some country fans in here. Paramore, nice. I tried to get Foo Fighters tickets and could not get Foo Fighters tickets, and that was the last concert I was hoping to go to. All right, we got some Ariana Grande, we got some Michael Bublé, 21 Pilots, Teletubbies. I'm assuming that's for the kids, but maybe you're a Teletubbies fan, who knows? All right, I love seeing the variety here. And I love seeing that we are literally from all over Oklahoma. That's the joy and blessing of having virtual conferences, is that we can really come together from wherever we are. So thank you all. Please continue to introduce yourself. Please continue to add your concert hopes and dreams as we start to go back to normal in terms of outings. And hopefully this helped you navigate the chat box as well, because we will be doing some additional questions. All right. And so now in the chat, and I know some of you are still introducing yourselves, and that's great, but we'd also like you to take a moment to just reflect a bit, think about this past year, think about as we approach this 2021-2022 school year, what do you think some of the strengths students will have going into this next school year? And what are some potential challenges that they might face? And if you would, put a 1 and then your answer for question number 1. So for strengths students might have, just put a number 1 and then the strengths they might have. And then for potential challenges, go ahead and write a 2 and then the potential challenges that students might have. And so I'm already seeing a couple more tech experience, flexibility, lots of technology, ability to adapt. So I'm seeing those themes already unfolding. Yeah, they're just rolling in. It's so great. Okay, and then yes, for some challenges, besides, you know, some of the struggles just social emotionally, we have the social connections just with other students and with their teachers, motivation and engagement, some increased gaps in learning perhaps. I'm seeing a lot of gaps. Difficulty just adjusting to the routine and organization of regular school again, increased anxiety. So we have some specific subject areas mentioned, math skills in particular, foundational skills, positivity. And now we have 2 years of kind of not so normal routines. And so that could lead to some struggles as well. Yeah, getting tired very quickly. I know even just on Zoom all day can lead to some exhaustion, but then coming back in person also, we're Zoomies online, but we can also be so tired from that person-to-person interaction. And so adjusting to that and adjusting to coming to school every day. Yeah, and so we see a lot of themes here, a lot of the opportunities there. And so the question now becomes, how do we leverage the strengths that students are coming into this year with in order to address those struggles and challenges? That's what we're taking a look at today. And we're presenting a few strategies that are evidence-based, are research-based, to hopefully help students and support them in their learning for this year. And so one of those strategies is called accelerating learning or learning acceleration. And often we think of acceleration, especially in terms of, math and other subject areas, that acceleration just means skipping material. And in this case, that's not exactly what we're talking about. In this case, with accelerating learning, we're talking about a focused intervention strategy that provides students with extra time and support to address any unfinished learning that they may have from the previous year. And it's structured in a way that we're providing it just in time versus loaded up on the front end of the school year or starting with review units or anything like that. Instead, we're focusing on grade level instruction, on grade level opportunities, and we're scaffolding in the prior knowledge that students may have missed along the way. This accelerating of learning can occur both during classroom time or outside of it. So there are opportunities for after school programming, but there's also the opportunity within your classroom or as a co-rec to your on grade level classroom work. And so just again to differentiate between the learning acceleration versus a traditional remediation strategy. With acceleration, because students are engaging in on grade level content and only accessing previous grade levels materials as in terms of supporting their on grade level instruction, students tend to be more self-confident and they actually have an increase in their engagement because they are navigating the on grade level material and they're provided that support so they can actually interact and accomplish the grade level tasks. Whereas with remediation, students often know that they're put in the remediation courses. They call themselves, slow or low, or say they're in the low kids class or the slow class. They identify and really suffer as a result with their confidence levels because they perceive themselves to not be able to engage in the grade level content. And so we see that engagement slowly decrease, especially as they're entering, middle and high school levels and they're still in that remediation path. With learning acceleration, students are applying the skills that prior learning immediately in the context of on grade level learning versus, as I mentioned earlier, receiving review units that they may or may not use later on. And then for the goals of learning acceleration, it's really to learn on time with their peers. They are learning simultaneously with their already on grade level peers versus trying to catch them up or get them thrown into a regular classroom or anything along those lines. We're really working simultaneously with the on grade level content to support their learning. And so on the next slide, we have launched a statewide initiative to help support learning acceleration, as well as other aspects that we know the pandemic has shifted or renegotiated in terms of our everyday instruction. And so that initiative is called Ready Together Oklahoma. And so Ready Together Oklahoma has just been launched. It features guidance documents, along with some webinar recordings describing strategies like acceleration of learning. And it'll continue to be added to over the next 3 years to really provide concentrated support for teachers, administrators, community members, schools, and districts. And so we do currently have a brief on learning acceleration. And Dawn is great, and she just cycled to that slide. And so the question is, how can accelerated learning models support students with unfinished learning? There's soon to be additional guidance briefs that are more subject area specific. And so, for example, you'll see on the right-hand side, and a little blurry because it's not quite released yet, but we have how can schools support students in unfinished learning in mathematics, as well as we're going to have language arts and other subject areas coming soon. But for now, what we would like you to do is engage and interact with this first Ready Together guidance document. And so Dawn has linked the interactive Google document landing page. If you click on that link, it will force you to make your own copy. So those are your own individual notes at that point. You can type anything in there that you want and it won't impact anybody else's document. And in that landing document, if you click on either slide 13 or just scroll down just a little bit, you can see where it says read how can accelerated learning models support students with unfinished learning. And so if you click on that link, you will see the actual guidance document. This is on our Ready Together webpage as well. But we invite you to read through this article. And most of you have your cameras off, but feel free to turn your cameras off as you read. And as you read, there's a series of questions that you can use to reflect. And so as you read, think about what are you noticing? What is a key takeaway that you would share with a colleague? What suggestions in the document are you already doing in your classroom or in your school? And what do you still wonder after reading? And so we're going to give you just about, probably 6 minutes to read and respond in your interactive document, and then we'll come back together. This is your 2-minute warning, so you have about 2 minutes. If you're just joining us, I will drop into the chat our interactive document. All right, now we know that 6 minutes is probably not enough time to do a deep dive into this article. However, we hope that you were able to survey the guidance document and pull at least 1 or 2 noticings and takeaways from the document. And so if you are willing to provide 1 takeaway from this document, we would encourage you to add that. You can copy and paste from your interactive document or type into the chat right now. 1 takeaway that came from reading this article, or guidance document rather. Importance of not remediating, keeping all students on pace. Accelerated does not necessarily mean speed up or compress. Technology might be a great way to target some students. Being intentional about targeted instruction. And yes, absolutely, time is always a challenge, and we're going to talk a little bit about some ways that we could potentially address that. Students will hopefully feel more confident in the classroom. Embedding in grade level learning. I love seeing all of these takeaways in just 6 minutes. It's fantastic. And Kelly, your comment about accelerating learning meaning rush through it. Yes, I mean, that is the common, assumption or definition. A lot of times we think of accelerated classes as just rush through, but in this case, we're really talking about still scaffolding.
Yeah, they have an 8 and a 10.
Oh, there we go. All right. Okay, and so, yes, and I believe that, time is always our challenge with this work. And so as much as we can do upfront prior to actually being in our classrooms and engaging with our students, the more prepared that we are, that will allow us the time to truly concentrate and focus on the structures and strategies that we need to put in place. And so if Dawn, you'll move to the next slide for us. And again, thank you all for your input on these comments. I'm loving seeing all of the takeaways that you have. We are going to just talk a little bit about a process for assessing and addressing unfinished learning and really attending to that learning acceleration idea. And so we think about it in terms of understanding what our grade level content truly is. We study our standards, study our grade level standards, but also identify any prerequisite skills that students might need in order to access those on grade level standards and content. In some cases, it may be that we're spiraling our curriculum, and so it's a repetition or it's a reworking of something they've already experienced. But in others, you know, like in math, for example, there may be those prior skills that are absolutely vital from previous grade levels that students may have missed. And so it's our responsibility to bring them into our grade level content without losing the grade level content we're addressing. And so we'll talk about strategies that we can use to do that. Then after we've understood our own standards and the prerequisite skills that are needed in order to have students access and understand our current grade level content, we're going to look into the diagnosing of what students actually need. And so we have the high level ideas, we have the connections across our standards, but now we need to actually determine what students know and what they may not know. And we can do that by using formative assessments that Dawn will be sharing with us in just a few minutes. We also want to consider whether these gaps work for our entire class or if it's just a small number of students who are not ready to move forward with a given set of content. And so if it's whole class, we can implement our tier 1 high quality instruction. But if it's a small group of students, we may need to move into tier 2 and tier 3 differentiation methods. And then finally, we have the take action. And so we've planned what we're going to do for those students, and then we're going to actually do it. And so we have arrows with these steps because it's never just an easy as 1, 2, 3 step process. We're constantly going to be looking back and further understanding our standards. And then we're also going to be constantly using formative assessment data and our student work to actually look into and dive into what students need. And then we're also going to be constantly planning and implementing our action steps. And so it's constant back and forth working through, but these 3 areas really are the key to helping with acceleration of learning. And so we're going to focus mostly on the understand piece first, because that is what we can do before we even see our students, is study the standards for an upcoming unit and identify any prerequisite skills. And so if you can go to the next slide, I have a couple examples of how we can do this in different subject areas. And so for the first example, I have a chart from our Return to Learn Launching Instruction for Secondary Mathematics guidance document, which is also linked in the interactive agenda for today. And so what we did to identify these skills, this is for a pre-algebra class. I actually used our OK Math frameworks, and that's also linked in our interactive document. But the OK Math frameworks have a suggested learning progression that bundles all of our objectives together in a way that leads to a natural learning progression and connects to some big ideas or essential understandings. And so using the big ideas as the connectors, I identified our pre-algebra standards for our first unit, and I looked at what 7th grade standards might be necessary in order for students to grapple with and understand the pre-algebra content. And so here you see that we have on the left our on grade level content. In the middle column, we have the objectives that will support and help with the proficiency of our on grade level standards. And then the big ideas are actually the same big ideas that are in our OK Math framework that connect and link those two grade levels together. And so if we're addressing those big ideas, then students are starting to see those connections across their grade level content and across their mathematics. We would use a formative assessment to determine if students needed to get extra help with those 7th grade objectives, or if they were ready to move on straight into the pre-algebra work. And then we would move on from there. And so another example is with language arts. And so our English language arts team just launched their brand new English language arts academic standards. And along with the academic standards, they've published a series of guidance documents, including what you see on the screen, which is a vertical alignment chart, which allows you as a teacher to see how each objective progresses from pre-K through 12. And so that will help you when you're scaffolding and determining those prerequisite skills needed to address current level content in language arts. And yes, Sharon, it's absolutely awesome. And this was developed by a team of Oklahoma educators, as well as our English language arts directors at the Office of Curriculum and Instruction. Those resources are all linked in your interactive document as well. So please feel free to explore those. And so those are two ways that we can take a look and really identify prerequisite skills. You can do this for each of your units throughout the year. You can really plan out all of this in advance. I know many of you already do that, where you already are taking a look at which standards you're going to teach when and how you're going to pull those previous grade level contents into your current standards. But rather than, a remediation or a review unit before diving into the grade level material, think about maybe using just a warm up or a quick formative check to see what students actually need once we get into the school year and once you've identified potential prerequisite that they may have missed. And so next up, I just wanted to send really what I feel is a powerful statistic about the importance of addressing on grade level work versus the remediation. This is a statistic from TNTP's The Opportunity Myth. And when students had access to on grade level content, even when they were further behind in their peers when they first got started, they closed the gap with their peers by more than 7 months. They made more than 7 months worth of progress compared to their peers. And so it's just very, very important to keep on grade level content at the forefront. We know it's difficult, and we know that there are so many skills that students may have missed during the past year, year and a half. But if we can approach it from that accelerated learning perspective, we can keep students confident, but also we can really just make sure that they're learning what they need to. And with that, we're going to talk about the other 2 steps in this process of addressing unfinished learning. And so Dawn is going to take it away from here.
Great, thank you, Christine. Thank you so much for walking us through that process that we can use to help us better understand some of the kind of high-level gaps that some of our students may be faced with when they return to your classroom this fall. So as we move from kind of understanding at a very high level based on kind of the landscape of our Oklahoma State standards, we're going to be transitioning into what we call diagnosing. And this allows us to really kind of drill down and pinpoint specific learning needs and specific learning that is in place and solidified. And one of the best, most readily available tools to be able to do this kind of diagnostic work is to use formative assessments. Formative assessments are at your disposal to use, and you can embed them seamlessly into your classroom instruction. These formative assessments are these planned opportunities or checkpoints that we have throughout the course of a unit of study that allow us to get insights into how student learning is progressing or maybe not progressing. So of course, we would never want to wait until the end of a course of study or unit of study, to rely on just those summative assessments. So I'm curious, as we're talking about formative assessments, if you could drop into the chat, what are your 2 favorite techniques for formative assessment? Let's have an opportunity to share with our colleagues here. I'm seeing exit tickets. Yeah, those are a real favorite. Kahoot, that's great. Very engaging for students. Exit tickets, Kahoot, classroom bingo. Mastery Connect, IXL, some of those online resources, quick post-it notes, quizzes, writing as an analysis. Wow, I'm seeing a lot of kind of repetition here, so we definitely have some favorites, but also sprinkled in are some new ideas. Blookit, I'm not familiar with that. Nearpod, that's another great one. So thank you so much for sharing those. And you know, one of the things that I didn't notice, except for maybe a couple of folks, are analyzing student work samples. And when we're talking about analyzing student work, we want to dig a little bit deeper than what, you know, an exit ticket, which we're usually looking for kind of a quick touch point, a quick response. I noticed that somebody put in the chat, they like to analyze student writing tasks. And that can be a wonderful way for us to really kind of diagnose what is going on with student learning. So I'm curious, I have a follow-up question. When you do look at student work, whether it's a writing sample or even more of maybe a robust exit ticket, what do you see when you look at student work? I'm curious, think about that for a second and take a minute to jot down in the chat. What do you see or what do you notice when you're really looking at student work? Mm. Mm. Yeah, some interesting answers are starting to roll in. We're looking at their level of understanding, their clarity for directions, which is really important. Did students understand the task at hand? Looking for any misconceptions that they may have, that is crucial. Looking for application of skills and knowledge. Looking for certain steps in a process helps us understand maybe where students are getting stuck. Comprehension, looking for deep levels of comprehension, content development, analysis skills. So there's lots of different things that we as practitioners are looking for when we have a critical eye on our student work. And I say critical, meaning not in the sense of seeing students as mistake makers, but really understanding students as sense makers. And so this is kind of a real shift that it sounds like many of us have already engaged in, is looking at student work with a lens of not what mistakes are students making, but more so, what do students know? What are students thinking? How are they thinking? And, you know, maybe why are these mistakes showing themselves? So I really appreciate some of the ideas that are coming into the chat. Because it's when we look at student work through this kind of really, you know, heightened lens that really helps us kind of zero in, drill down, and really understand where we need to go with student learning. So some really thoughtful responses coming in the chat. So appreciate that. So we're going to have a little opportunity to actually look at some student work samples and really kind of practice some of this diagnosing. Okay, so what I have for you on the screen is a 5th grade student work sample from a science class. And so what was happening in this science class is a student had made a claim. You can see there, students are presented with 2 pictures, a gargoyle that is freshly constructed, and then another gargoyle that is old and has seen the test of time. And so students were having conversations, and one particular student named Robert had made a claim. And then this student is talking about whether they agree with the claim, they disagree with the claim, and then providing some evidence. So I'm going to read briefly what our student said. He said he agrees with Robert. He says that substances react with the stone and it turns it into a different material. And then the evidence that this particular student used to support the claim was that he or she thinks that this is because substances can change but not disappear. They can become particles too small to be seen, like the gargoyle's face changed, but it didn't disappear. The acid rain reacted to gargoyle's face, like the acid reaction with limestone to create a new substance. And then in parentheses, this student has a gas. There is a lot happening in that brief student work sample. So in just a few moments, you're going to have an opportunity, great vocab. Yeah, there is definitely some wonderful vocab. But in just a few moments, you're going to engage in the process that I'm going to model for you right now. You're going to be working with groups to read and work through some student work samples, and you're going to engage in that practice of high-level understanding and then pinpointing through diagnosis. So based on this student response, what do I understand about this student's learning? A couple of really high-level things based on the science standards that I'm able to glean very quickly from this student's response is that they understand that substances are too small to be seen. So this represents those cross-cutting concepts. Specifically, we're talking about the cross-cutting concept of scale. Perhaps we have some science teachers in the room with us. You'll understand those cross-cutting concepts. And the student also is sharing some disciplinary core ideas related to substances, again, at various scales. The student also understands that substances can change but not disappear. Again, they're alluding to some of that those disciplinary core ideas. And then lastly, this student has some understanding of that reactions can cause substances to change. So very quickly, I'm able to learn that this student has some solid understanding related to substances and some understanding of reaction. Okay, but as I'm able to dig a little bit deeper and think a little bit more critically and think specifically about what were those previous standards related to matter, related to substances, and think about where students are going, if I have some time to dig in here, I can do some diagnostic work. So I know that this student does have some misunderstandings related to matter that I'm going to have to drill into. Especially when we're talking about matter that is unseen. Also, this student has some misunderstandings related to particle size variation. So some, particles are very small, but when we're creating molecules, of course, there's a size difference there. Those things are getting larger. So that's something I definitely need to pay attention to as I'm working with this student. I noticed too that this student doesn't have any modeling to go along with their thinking. They didn't share any modeling. And that's one of the science and engineering practices for this particular standard is being able to do some modeling. So that's really something that I want to kind of think through as I'm working with this particular student. And then also some confusion that I need to clear up, maybe some misunderstandings related to specifically over what reactions really are. Okay, so those are some things that when I drill down a little bit more, help me understand where I really need to go with this student, okay? So we are going to spend a little bit of time having you kind of engage in that process of looking at student work, thinking about the high-level understandings that you can quickly glean, and then thinking a little bit more, drilling down a little bit more to be a little bit more specific. So that will inform your decision making when it's time to take action. So what we're going to do right now is you can see the two icons that are on this slide. We've got a breakout room activity to engage in, and then you'll be recording your group responses on your landing page. Now, we've got a lot of folks in the room today, which is really exciting. So we're going to be breaking you into about 20 different breakout rooms. Now, because of the large number, there's no guarantee that you are going to be put in a breakout room that is specific to your particular content area. So we're going to ask for some grace and understanding as you work through some student work samples that we know you may not be the most familiar with. But based on probability, there's likely to be one or two or even more folks in your group that do have a little bit deeper understanding. So we ask for you to lean on each other in your group as you're working through these student work samples. So Christine has been given hosting abilities. So I'm going to ask Christine to work on getting those breakout rooms while we quickly review the directions and let you get situated. You're going to be taking about 5 minutes to individually study the student work sample for your particular group number. So if you are in breakout group number 4, you will be looking at student work sample number 4. You can find that by referencing your landing page. Then after those 5 minutes of kind of independent study time have elapsed, we ask you then to work in your groups to take about 10 minutes to compile your understandings of what this student knows, and then to drill down and try to diagnose some specifics that you can glean based on a particular student work sample.
All right, you should be automatically getting bumped into your rooms shortly, and we will bring you back when it's time to come back.
So those were some pretty quiet breakout rooms. Perhaps we are on breakout room Zoom fatigue after the year that we've had. But Christine and I are really curious. We put in the chat that we would like one or two brave souls to, if you're feeling froggy, unmute and just talk about what your group discussed in terms of, you know, what student understandings were present. And also what kind of things did you diagnose for this particular student? So I'm going to give some wait time and then we'll have someone, if you have the option or to unmute yourself and use your microphone, go ahead and do so. And I see Jade that you've raised your hand. Thank you so much. Go ahead and unmute. Thanks for sharing, Jade.
Thank you for having me. So our group, it was very easy to identify what skills they had mastered, what skills they were struggling with, and kind of figure out ways to address that. But one thing that our group agreed on is that for secondary teachers, we would need some sort of larger CFA to, like at the beginning of a unit or lesson, to identify which kids we should drill down on work samples for, because for a secondary teacher, it just seems really overwhelming to try to look that deeply at every single work sample for every single skill to identify what they need to work on and where their gaps are. But identifying the gaps from that work sample, ours was an elementary personal narrative, and luckily 2 of our group members are ELA and 1 was elementary, and we kind of compared like, oh well, for an elementary student we thought this was really good, or this is something that they should know by now, and things like that. So kind of working with those vertical alignments and progressions that the State Department provides, I think are going to be key.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing, Jade. And I think one of the things that we can refer back to when Christine was speaking earlier, so as to not overwhelm us, is to think about those just in time pieces where we're not trying to, fill gaps for the entire year in a very, in a 1 week long unit, but thinking about what are the just in time, gaps of the student, or what are the gaps that are going to hinder student progress on this just in time moment, skill, concept, or idea. So yeah, that can be super useful. And then I believe Janelle Lawson, who looks like she's out in the beautiful wilderness. Janelle.
It's actually a picture of UCO.
urban jungle.
Yeah. I noticed that on ours, and it was secondary math, the student did have a base knowledge of what the multiplication, what times what, equaled what. However, they were not aware that the PEMDAS rule, solving the issue that is within the parentheses first, and therefore they would have gotten that question wrong, and that would have been something that needed to be gone over, because that's a really important rule when it comes to algebra, and when they go into college and stuff, they need that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Janelle. Thank you to the two of you who have kind of shared some of the insights that your group was able to get from looking at, student work samples. And, Christine made a comment in the chat box that is so true. Doing this kind of quick formative assessment, one of the things you can be doing is walking around, leaning over students' shoulders and getting a quick look at what students are writing down on their paper, how they're maybe setting up a diagram or setting up a modeling task. That can really, utilizing that physical space to walk around, kind of, peek in on students will save you some grading time in the long run. But that's certainly something, as you guys as skilled practitioners know, moving around, watching students as they work can be, and listening to those conversations too, can be very beneficial and very impactful. And Brandy uses Pear Deck, a great tool. It's a free Google add-on that you can use to help do some of those quick formative assessments. There's some features like quizzes and polls and different things like that. So thank you guys. So after having the opportunity to kind of look at some student work samples, I have 3 questions. You don't have to answer all 3 of them. You can pick your favorite. But there are 3 kinds of things I'd like for us to think about. The first one is, how can deeply analyzing student work benefit students in your class? Perhaps we've touched on this already, but if you can kind of formulate some thoughts around that, go ahead and put that answer in the chat. Another question you might feel inclined to think about is, what implications might analyzing student work have for your instruction? Okay, and the last thing to think about is, maybe you're having some ideas already about how you can increase the quality of your tasks to help you get richer analysis of that student work. So 3 questions, pick your favorite. When you're responding in the chat, make sure you let us know if you're answering questions 1, 2, or 3. I'm gonna give a little bit of wait time for you, but then go ahead and think about one of these and put an answer in the chat box. A lot of great responses pouring into the chat box. A couple of people have mentioned this idea of mindset for students. For example, using this as a way to let students know that their mistakes and their misconceptions actually have value as a learning community, because it's those misconceptions, those mistakes that help us course correct and plan for more meaningful, rich instruction. So really liked the idea of how you can capitalize on that as you work to build a classroom community that celebrates all aspects of learning. So that is pretty profound thought on a 11:41 on a Monday morning. So thank you so much. In the essence of time, we are going to move along, but if you're finishing up, please go ahead and feel free to continue to jot your thoughts in the chat. So, as we're starting to kind of pivot to thinking about that last piece of the puzzle, which is the take action, we've had an opportunity to analyze the standards and the vertical learning progressions of our specific content standards. We've had an opportunity to use student work to provide a more critical diagnosis. But that third piece is the taking action. What are we going to do next? And that is a teacher decision that we have to be pretty critical about. So, we know the impact of teacher quality. It's one of the few school characteristics that significantly affect student performance. So where and how we take action based on student learning is a critical piece of the puzzle. So we're going to spend the last 15-20 minutes of our session really thinking about, now that we know the understandings, we've diagnosed this student work, where do we go from here? What steps do we take? Okay. So I'm curious, when you are thinking about instructional practices or instructional strategies, as you are designing your lesson, how do you decide which instructional practices you're going to use in your classroom? Okay, put yourself in that position where you're planning your next lesson, you're designing the learning activity. How do you decide which practices you're going to use? Let's take a few minutes to think about that and respond in the chat. Yeah, some really interesting ideas coming through in the chat. And, a response that I've seen a few times is, well, it kind of depends. And you're absolutely right. It depends on a lot of factors. And some of those factors are what we just explored, right? What knowledge and skills and dispositions does the student currently have in place? What are the gaps or misunderstandings that need to be course corrected, or gaps that need to be filled? So there are a lot of things that we need to think about when we're selecting the most useful and most high leverage, bang for your buck instructional practices. So this is kind of that last piece of the puzzle that we put together when we're thinking about moving students forward. So we want to think about what practices are high leverage, and what does it even mean to be a high leverage practice? These are those practices in our classroom that are going to be critical practices that have some research backing behind them to demonstrate the effectiveness of them. High leverage practices and strategies are wonderful because they transcend content area and grade level. If you think about some of our most impactful high leverage practices, for example, student discourse and student dialogue is impactful in a kindergarten class just as it is in one of our high school advanced placement courses. That is a high leverage practice that is good for all kids in all content areas, okay? Our high level practices provide the infrastructure to support effective teaching. And again, they're consistent and help students of all ages and all different progressions along the learning spectrum really move forward. Okay, so we want to focus on, we know that there are a lot of things we can be doing in our classroom, but we want to make sure that we're selecting based on this diagnosis. We want to prescribe the instructional strategies or the instructional practices that are going to be most high leverage, okay, and most bang for your buck. We have designed some tools right here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education that walk you through how to implement several high leverage practices in your classroom. We have what we call the Oklahoma Excel strategy briefs, and these are co-developed by teachers in the field who have tried these high leverage practices, who have worked to refine them, get them down to just a few easy steps for implementation. So what we would like to do is spend a little bit of time having you review some of these high leverage practices that are in our Oklahoma Excel strategy briefs. And then we're going to give you the opportunity to come back and reflect on what did you notice about these practices, what makes them high leverage. Okay, so you have the entire portfolio of Oklahoma Excel strategy briefs in your interactive Google document. What we'd like for you to do is, in the essence of time, we're just going to give you about 4 minutes because we still got a few things to get through, just to quickly peruse 1 or 2 strategy briefs that are of interest to you. And then as you're perusing, make note of what do you notice about these high leverage practices, and what is in there that makes them high leverage. So about 4 minutes of some quiet skimming and scanning time. You can turn off your cameras if you haven't already done that, and we'll come back in about 4 minutes. Person mentioned. And yeah, these are the critical infrastructure, right? Kind of critical best practices. And some folks are really pointing out specific strategies about teacher modeling. Teacher modeling is so important, and it goes across all disciplines, and student modeling as well of their work. So modeling is really a key instructional practice. Yeah, teacher modeling is a fan favorite. So I'm guessing some of you have referenced our authentic teacher modeling strategy brief, which is excellent. So in the essence of time, we're going to move forward because we've got a few more things to do before we wrap. Just briefly, this is not in any way an exhaustive list of high leverage practices, but just to give you an example, cooperative and flexible small group learning structures, good for all kids, right? Having clear learning objectives goes in all content areas, all disciplines, good for all kids. Giving students timely feedback and making adjustments based on what you see students doing. Organizational routines, scaffolding supports, thinking maps, graphic organizers, modeling or non-linguistic representations, student discourse, discussion, all of those wonderful things. So again, not an exhaustive list, but just kind of a few fan favorites that we can use to really be specific when we're trying to take those action steps to help our students. I want you to think back to this whole group sample we talked about earlier with the 5th grade science student who was tasked with thinking about how are these changes happening to the gargoyle over time. So we had a chance to talk about what understandings this student has based on the grade level standards, the cross-cutting concepts for science, the science and engineering practices, okay? We had time to really kind of zero in and do some more diagnostic work to kind of be specific. Lastly, that last critical piece is to think about what specific action steps might we take in terms of high leverage practices to really support this student. So a couple of the things that I would be inclined to try out with this student or this group of students is the use of a driving question board. We actually have an Oklahoma Excel strategy brief on driving question boards. It's a popular technique in the science classroom, but could be easily adapted to fit into any discipline. This would allow us to kind of pose, allow students an opportunity to pose some questions so that I could really see what questions this particular student has. Another thing that I think might be really helpful for this particular student is to have him or her engage in some scientific discourse with students. And I would make sure to have some planned, essential type questions ready so that I could really glean some more particular insight into what this student knows about substances and matter. Okay, so those are 2 high leverage practices that I might think about to support this student and this class moving forward. I want to encourage you now to take action on your student work sample. You can see that had we the time, we would get into our breakout rooms again so that we could talk about this with our colleagues. We don't unfortunately have time for that, but we'd like to encourage you to just take a few solo minutes of think time. Think back to that student work sample that you had a chance to analyze. What next steps, what would you do to take action to support that student moving forward, and why? What is your reasoning or rationale? So if we could get you in just the last couple of seconds to jot down in the chat a high leverage practice that you think would support that particular student and why you think it would be beneficial. So let's just take 60 seconds to get that into the chat. Right, I'm seeing in some instances, you guys had some work samples that these students could probably benefit from having some teacher modeling, right? I also noticed that somebody also thought a driving question board could be useful. And then somebody also said some aggressive monitoring, which is a technique to give feedback. I think somebody said differentiation. So these are all wonderful high leverage practices that you can incorporate after you've had a chance to really kind of analyze student work. Okay. So it is about that time. We know that this has been a lot of information in a very, quick 1.5 hour session. So we know that there are probably some things that are still circling around in your head, but we're also hoping that some things have been squared away for you. So in the chat, if you could jot down one thing that has been squared away for you as a result of this session. One thing that's a little bit clearer, one thing that is useful, heading back into your practice this fall, and then one thing that is still circling your brain, something you still have a question about. And as you're doing that, I'd just like to remind you that here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, if you are interested in working collaboratively with other teachers next year, we have a wonderful professional learning opportunity for you called Oklahoma Excel. Oklahoma Excel, again, is the program that's responsible for drafting some of those wonderful strategy briefs that we saw earlier. We have extended the deadline, and we have professional development awards still available to give away to district teams who are interested in participating. This next coming year, we will focus very deeply on assessing and addressing some of these student learning gaps that have likely been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I wanted to make sure that you have that on your radar. We also have all of these resources and links on your landing page. Also, that is where you will get access to the professional development certificate that you have earned by attending today's session. We also have included our contact information. If you have any questions throughout the course of the school year, Christine and I are always happy to connect with educators and practitioners across the state and answer any questions and connect you to other teachers and resources that would be helpful. So I will turn it back to Christine if you have any closing thoughts, but it is 12 o'clock. We finished right in time.
Yes, thank you all so much for staying with us for the past hour and a half. I loved hearing all of your insights in both the chat and out loud. So thank you so much for coming. And definitely, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day. Oh, I'm sorry, somebody mentioned the PD certificate. So before we end the meeting, I wanted to mention the PD certificate is actually linked in your interactive document. And so towards the bottom of that document, and Dawn is sharing her screen so you can see, it says copy a PD certificate for this session. So you can access it right there. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.